Today, we're talking about anxiety and how hypnotherapy and working with a hypnotist could help. And I'm delighted to be joined by Hypnotherapy Directory member, certified Master Hypnotherapist, and founder of the Optimind Method, Biodun Ogunyemi.
Thanks for inviting me on.
Wonderful to have you here. And before we start, perhaps you could tell us a bit about you, the work you do, and what you think people should know about you.
So as Lucy said, my name is Biodun Ogunyemi. I class myself as a therapist. I'm based in Glasgow in Scotland, and I work with a lot of individuals. I also work with companies as well, mainly using different processes, especially hypnotherapy, which is the main process that I use. And I kind of class myself as a person that can help people to achieve a lot of their goals. And sometimes nowadays, I also class myself as a mindset coach because people understand that more, and it's more acceptable to people. Yeah, and I've been doing this probably for well over 10 years.
So today we're going to talk about how hypnotherapy can help for anxiety. Firstly, do you meet with a lot of people in your practice who are seeking support with this?
Yes, absolutely. I would probably say I was thinking about this earlier on, and I would say about probably as high as 90% of the people I see have some sort of issue with what's termed as anxiety. And I've seen that increase, especially over the last 2 years.
Oh, that's interesting. And let's start with how hypnotherapy can help with anxiety.
So anxiety as a term, essentially what somebody's usually experiencing is some sort of negative emotion. So it's something that they're perhaps feeling that they don't want to feel, or something they're doing they don't want to do, or something they're not doing they do want to do. Alternatively, it could be something that they want to do, but they find that they can't do it for whatever reason. So that emotion that they feel that we term as anxiety, the way that hypnotherapy can help with that, if we class that as a negative emotion, whether it starts with a feeling or a thought, then the way hypnotherapy can help is it can help to allow the person to change the association with that feeling or whatever they're thinking. And that's the main thing, because we create habits every single day, good habits, bad habits. And the brain doesn't really distinguish whether it's a good habit or a bad habit. It doesn't make any difference. Once it's conditioned in the mind and those neural pathways are set, then you'll just keep experiencing the same issue over and over again as it generalizes. And this is where the unconscious mind, you call it the subconscious or the unconscious mind. This is where hypnotherapy can help to change the associations and change the behaviors as well.
Can you talk me through how someone who comes to you who is experiencing great anxiety might benefit from that conversation with yourself and how that might go?
So the first thing that I want to establish when I speak to somebody is really what they're experiencing or what they have been experiencing. And if they say they're experiencing the label as anxiety because they're calling it anxiety, which is absolutely fine. I know it's a negative emotion. I know it's something they don't want to feel. Then the next thing I want to establish is firstly how they know that emotion or whatever they're experiencing is anxiety. And also I would be asking them, if I wanted to experience what you have been experiencing or what you are experiencing, what do I need to feel or what do I need to do? Because I want to understand exactly what's going on. And the reason I ask that question is because at a deeper level, I want to get a sense of what they're experiencing. And it's usually in the somatic mind, which is in the body. It's usually in the body somewhere. And I want to establish what they're actually experiencing, because once I have that, then we need to understand, what do we need to change? What associations do we need to change? That's the questions that I'll be asking the person. And then I'll also ask the person how they're feeling in the moment that they're in the room. And I'll also establish when was the last time that they experienced this emotion that they term as anxiety.
That's so interesting. You mentioned the somatic mind. So you talked about being in the body. And when I personally think about anxiety, I do think about the physical impact. So perhaps my stomach might feel quite clenched, or perhaps I know that I'm clenching my jaw, I'm holding my shoulders. What would be your next steps if someone was presenting in that way, that kind of very tucked in, tight feeling of anxiety?
As I say, the first thing is I want to find out, how the person knows that it's anxiety, and I want to establish that. Usually that's some sort of feeling in the body, and a lot of people talk about general anxiety, but general is just as the word says, it's general. And I find that people that I see, they differ completely how they experience or what they term as anxiety, which means it can be different for every single person. So once I establish what they're experiencing, let's say they say, well, I have my fingers feel tingly and my heart beats and I feel something at the pit of my stomach. And then I'll ask the question, okay, so because you're experiencing these emotions, that's what you consider to be anxiety. And usually they'll accept that because that's what they believe. Now, whether it is anxiety or not, it doesn't really matter. It's whatever they're experiencing, which is negative. And then really what I want to do then is I want to attempt to say, well, if you weren't experiencing that, any of those emotions, if you didn't experience them, then how would you feel instead of the way you feel if you didn't experience that? Because what I want to do is start to get them to consider how they want to be different. In other words, this is what you experienced. When was the last time you experienced it? I might get a kind of scale on a scale of 0 to 10. How severe was it at the time, just to establish how severe it was, and then start to work through the process of change once I establish exactly what's happening. The other thing that I want to mention as well, is a lot of people, when they come in, they talk about my anxiety. They say my anxiety causes me this, my anxiety does this. That's actually an identity-based statement. So they're accepting that as part of them. And that's quite common because it's been going on for quite some time. So they can't see any different. They don't see any way of changing it. So that's why also they get caught in the loop and they keep going round whatever they're experiencing. They keep going round in this loop and they can't get out of it. So the step that I want to take is really, okay, this is what you experienced in that moment. How do you want to be different, and start to move them towards how they can start to feel different. That's the main thing.
That point about using the word my and personalizing or taking it into your identity is really interesting. Do you work around language when people are coming to see you?
Yes, absolutely.
Can you share a bit more about that and how it can be helpful?
Yeah, of course. So the first thing usually I would establish with the person is, how are you feeling just now? In the session, how are you feeling in this moment? And depending on what they answer, I would say, right, okay, that's absolutely fine. Can I just ask, what do you think is going to happen in the next 3 minutes? Because I want to establish, and they usually they'll say, well, I don't know, or they might say, well, we'll still be chatting. Which to that I'll say, well, how do you know that? Because they don't, because anything could happen. And then I'll say, also, everything that's happened in your past, anything that's happened in your past is really, if any of it still affects you, then it can only be the memory. And this is just to begin to get them to open up, just to begin. I need to set the scene for them to begin to open up. Because one of the issues we have is the issue that most people experiencing with this term they call anxiety. First of all, the label of anxiety, that's an issue, because I know it's a negative emotion, it's something they don't want to feel. But how can somebody prove that it's actually anxiety? And hence we have the word general anxiety. So how can we prove it's anxiety? And I don't think there's anyone that can actually prove it's actually anxiety. It's just a negative emotion, which is absolutely fine. So what we want to change is we want to change how they relate to those thoughts and those feelings, because it's been conditioned over time. And interestingly enough, some of the research that I share with people is, according to Harvard research, there's different research, the average human being has around about 100,000 thoughts a day. 80% of those thoughts, the 100,000 doesn't really mean anything, because 80% of those thoughts are negative, and 90% of those thoughts are the same thoughts you had yesterday. In other words, you ruminate in negative thought. And if you ruminate in negative thought, and you have been doing that for some time, then that impacts how you feel, and then it's going to impact your behavior. And that's the major problem. That's why now we have a big increase in the number of people coming through with things like anxiety, especially, or negative emotions, and simply because the uncertainty that was created in the last few years, because not knowing is an issue. People want to know, and not knowing is an issue. And most people are either in the past or they're in the future, and they're not here in the present. They're not experiencing life in the moment. So if they're in the future or in the past, then that opens up the avenues for issues happening all the time.
So let's go back to, in terms of the inquiry, how important is that inquiry within your practice of getting people to separate what they say and what they know?
Well, it's very important because the belief system is really strong. Because people believe that this emotion that they're experiencing is anxiety, usually because somebody has told them it's anxiety. Now, that could come from anywhere. It could come from their social peer group. It could come from their GP or some other medical practitioner or somebody of authority. Somebody's told them that, well, that's anxiety and that's what that is. And because they've accepted that, and because it keeps happening over and over and over again, it's conditioned that it just becomes an automatic response. So it's the only way that they know how to deal with it. For example, if somebody keeps pressing your buttons and you keep responding, if you keep responding, they'll keep pressing that button because they know what to say to maybe annoy you. So they'll keep doing it. And they'll just keep doing it over and over and over again. And it's the same with this response that we feel, this negative emotion that we feel. Because we're so conditioned over time, we just keep responding to it. And unless something changes, then the person will just keep doing it because they don't know any other way. So they only know how to fight it, which takes us into resist or persist. You know, whatever you resist will persist, whatever you accept will transform, according to Carl Jung. So if I said to you right now, do not think of a pink elephant, then the first thing that comes to mind is a pink elephant. You know, try to calm down, just calm yourself down. Generally, a lot of these things are quite challenging to work for people because people know they should be calming down, but they can't.
If we could, we would.
Yes, absolutely. And also there's a lot of judgment goes on in the mind. Essentially, the mind is essentially the problem. The mind in neuroscience, for example, is there's different definitions of the mind, but essentially our thoughts come from the mind, come from our awareness, come from what we're doing, what we're seeing, what we're experiencing, telephone calls, conversations, and thoughts come in at random. The thought itself is not an issue. It doesn't really matter what the thought is. It's what you do with the thought that's the problem. That's what creates the issue in terms of the way we feel, whether it's in a specific setting, whether it's when we're inside or outside or in a vehicle or anywhere else. That's what creates the issue. It's our relationship with the thoughts or the feelings. So it's not that we need to change our thoughts, because that's for the average individual, it's going to be quite difficult for an average individual to change every negative thought to a positive thought, or to acknowledge a thought and let go of that thought. That's really difficult for the average individual. But what we need to do, what we require to do to change the way we feel, is change our relationship with our thoughts and feelings, how we relate to it. Because let's face it, in our sessions, as we go through working with people, teaching them different processes, doing hypnotherapy and teaching them self-hypnosis, the average individual will probably not get to a stage where they're going to meditate like a Buddhist monk. That's probably not going to happen.
I love the fact that you have a sense of realism in terms of what we're all capable of, but also that you are able to support people in this way. And I wondered if you could just share a bit about that. You said 80% of our thoughts are negative, and we will actually ruminate on those. So they will be the same in consecutive days. How can working with a hypnotherapist start to challenge that, or perhaps help us to make behavioural changes?
Yeah, so the main thing is that once we recognise that essentially the mind is not your friend, if I put it that way, once we recognise that, then we start to influence the individual by using unconscious processes. I use a lot of processes. I'm a big fan of Milton Erickson, so I've studied a lot of Milton Erickson's work, but we start to really change the way the person relates to their feelings and their thoughts. And we use the hypnotherapy to do that. So in other words, take them to, how do you want to feel? Instead of the way you felt on Wednesday, for example, how would you like to feel instead? if you to experience this again, how would you like to feel? Or a question like, if you no longer experience this and it was not an issue in your life, how would you be different? In other words, what would you be doing differently? What things would you be doing that you're not doing just now? How would it impact your life? How would it change your life? And it's really to get them to consider, if I didn't experience this issue, how would my life be different? What would I be doing? And then it's really to get them to experience that. We take them using hypnotherapy to get them to experience that and actually take them to that place, to that particular state, that particular behavior. And then once we have them in that state, is then to say, how are you just now, now that you're in that state. So that might be doing some hypnotherapy. While I'm doing the hypnotherapy, I use a lot of deep trance phenomena. So I use a lot of time distortion, slow time and fast time for those that, aren't familiar with time distortion. I use a lot of hallucination as well. So what you see or what you don't see. I use a lot of sort of regression, taking people back to certain times and places, which is quite useful. And a lot of these deep trance phenomena are really useful. Amnesia as well, the ability to forget or remember. They're really useful because if you get somebody into a particular state while they're in hypnosis, and then perhaps just allow them to come back into the room just enough to retain that state. Now, once they're in the desired state that they would like to be in, then I would take them back to the trigger of the problem. So I would take them back to, okay, so now that you're feeling good, so you're feeling good right now. Now that you're feeling good, I want you to go ahead and think about, last Tuesday when you had that really emotion that you call anxiety. I'd like you to take yourself back there. So it was in the kitchen, while you're feeling good, take yourself back to the kitchen and tell me what happens. Because you have the ideal state of how you want to be different, and you have the problem. And if you think about it, if we take the two states and at some point we bring them together with a stronger state to collapse the other state, that's really the essence of what we want to do, especially using hypnotherapy.
It's fascinating. And we have seen an increase in people wanting to know about hypnotherapy and how hypnotherapy can help them, but perhaps not completely understanding in the way that you've explained today what hypnotherapy is, because there are so many misconceptions still about hypnotherapy. What would you say to someone who might be frightened that they will be, quote unquote, out of control?
Yeah, so there's a lot of myths about hypnotherapy, and I think I'm on at the moment on my social media. I think on TikTok, I think I'm on myth number 16 or so. I'm going to see if I can get up to sort of upwards of maybe 21. But one of the myths is, you might get stuck in hypnosis. One of the other myths is the hypnotist is going to have magical powers. Another one is that you might forget everything and give away your PIN number. You might be dancing on the table. So there's all these misconceptions. Most people have watched a movie at some point. Now, when you're watching a movie and you're so engrossed in the movie, that essentially is an altered state, which is a trance state, which is the exact same state that you would be in if you're in hypnosis. Somebody might call your name while you're watching the movie and you might not even hear them. Or you could be driving in a car, for those that drive, not remembering the journey. You arrive at your destination, sitting at a set of traffic lights. The traffic lights change and you're still sitting there. And these are what I call natural trance states. And natural trance states is essentially the exact same state that you would be in. It's just a trance state. The difference is that you have somebody guiding you while you're in that state. Because at the outer conscious, what I call the outer conscious level, we can call it the conscious level, just everyday normal state of being, just like we're perhaps just now. In that everyday state, there is already people saying, why don't you, if you experience it, just try and do some deep breathing, try and calm down, try and relax and just know that you're okay. People have heard this time and time again. So the question is, why doesn't it work? And it doesn't work because you're trying to solve a problem at a different level that caused the problem. And that's why it's not a simple solution. It's not as simple as just you run out of something and you go and pick it up from the shop. It's completely different. This is more irrational. It's more, you shouldn't be feeling it, but for whatever reason you are. And often the challenge is that most people are trying to solve that with just everyday normal thinking, and it doesn't work. So hypnotherapy helps to get to the root of the emotion. It makes the emotional attachment so that the person can change. It becomes more of an emotional change. It becomes something that the person, maybe for some people, they feel a certain way and they begin to change certain things, maybe taking the smallest next step. And often that's one of the main issues, that people have consistently tried to solve it different ways, and for whatever reason, it doesn't work.
So the great thing about hypnotherapy is that you're in a receptive state, if you like. But for those who are worried, you're not out of control.
So you're fully aware. You're fully aware of what's going on. In hypnotherapy, in actual fact, you don't even need eye closure. You just need a focused state of attention. The reason we use eye closure in the sessions is just to cut out distractions. That's all. Just cut out distractions. So you're much more, as you say, you're much more receptive when you're in that state. So you're much more receptive to change. Essentially, the part that stops most people from changing is the voice in your head. For the ease, we can just call that the conscious mind. The voice in your head is the part that allows you to doubt and interferes with the process of change. So if we quieten down that voice in your head, just like if you're sitting at a set of traffic lights, that voice is quieting down and you're just sitting, the lights have changed, you're still sitting there. At that moment, you're more receptive to the person that pumps the horn behind you. And that's why you come back online. So when you're more receptive, in that much more receptive state, then the suggestions certainly, and anything else that's done in that state, you're much more likely the change is going to be a lot better. It's going to be a lot easier to attain.
I mean, as I said before, it's fascinating, it's intriguing, but we do know that for some people, working with a professional hypnotherapist might not be something they can afford right now. What would you say to someone who perhaps is looking for ways to work on these issues? Do you have some practical tips around managing anxiety for listeners?
So what we've established is that the anxiety itself is a negative emotion of some description. So in other words, it goes into the classification of it's something that somebody might be feeling that they don't want to feel. It could be something they're doing they don't want to do, something they're not doing they do want to do, or alternatively, it could be something else. So it usually falls into one of those categories. One of the issues is that because the individual themselves, they're so used to acknowledging this feeling that they've got, they do have a connection with that emotion. And because they have a connection and the connection is very, very strong and it's been conditioned, the neural pathways have been conditioned over time, it has this grip on the individual. So people automatically are already acknowledging this anxiety feeling. They're already acknowledging it. So the first thing we want to do is I use a process. I call it it's called the aware process. And I'll share it just now because it's really useful for most people. If you acknowledge the emotion, and some people call it the feeling in the body, the negative emotion in the body. Some people term it as the pain body. It doesn't really matter what you call it. The negative emotion that you experience it, if you acknowledge it and say, just acknowledge it to yourself, right, boom, got it right. I can feel it here. I know what this is. The first thing I want to change is I don't want to call it anxiety. Now, you might call it anxiety, and that's fine. It's fine. But the first thing we can do is we already know what it is. So we know it's that A word. But what we're going to do is we're just going to change the name. That's all. We're just going to change the name. And I say to people, I want you to change the name of it to something ridiculous, like Peppa Pig or their favorite cartoon character. You see how you laugh when I say that? Because what happens is if they choose something that they find amusing, something that's completely silly, it's unrealistic, completely unrealistic. So imagine the first thing they're going to do with that, with their aware process, is they acknowledge and accept. That's the acknowledge and accept. So they'll say, right, all right, I can feel it. I know what this is. Oh, it's Peppa Pig. Yeah, it's Peppa Pig. So then they'll say something like, whatever they call it, the next process is to just pause for a moment. That's the W, which I call wait and watch. Just wait, just pause, just to see what happens now that you've acknowledged it as something silly. Then once they just pause for a moment, the next phase of that is an action to make yourself feel more comfortable. Now, the action to make yourself feel more comfortable can be any action, depending on what happens. It can be go for a walk, go for a shower, jump in a plunge pool if you have a plunge pool. A simple action that people can put in there is simply slow down your breathing. So maybe just take a few breaths. I usually say 6 breaths. There's a process where I do something with 6 breaths. But essentially what you're doing is you're slowing down your breathing. So you're not trying to take deep breaths. The deep breath thing is another issue, because often what happens when people are feeling this way, they're trying to take deep breaths, they can't catch a breath, which then amplifies the process to say, I can't breathe, and then it goes from whatever it is into a full panic. We don't want to go there. Now, when you slow down your breathing, all you're doing is when you breathe in, when you breathe out, you just, as if you're blowing through a straw, and extend the out breath for as long as possible. And all you're doing is slowing down your breathing. Now, if you do that, that is really going to settle you down, because you're not trying to take a deep breath. You're slowing down your breathing. What this actually does, this process, it stimulates the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the longest of the cranial nerves, of the 12 cranial nerves, responsible for a lot of your breathing functions, your emotional center. And this actually just helps to settle that down. Very similar to jumping in a cold plunge pool. But a lot of people don't have a cold plunge pool. So something like this is just something you can slot in there. And there's a lot of evidence behind the whole anxiety, depression, that, a lot of the time it's because there's an overstimulation of the amygdala and an understimulation of the vagus nerve. So this helps to stimulate the vagus nerve. Just like relaxing the jaw. Relaxing the jaw helps to stimulate the vagus nerve and releases a lot of tension, because we hold a lot of tension here. So that's the action that you can put in there. It could be a series of just slowing down your breathing. That will be really effective, or it could be something else. The next part of the aware process is the R. And the R stands for remeasure and then rinse and repeat. So you remeasure. So how am I feeling right now? Oh, Peppa Pig's gone. He's not here, or Peppa Pig's still here. And if he's still here, then you go back to the acknowledge he's still here. You go back through the process again. And the E, if you move on to the E stands for end. That's I'm good. And all you do is cycle through that process. So acknowledge and accept, wait and watch, action to make yourself feel more comfortable, remeasure, and then end. And that's a really simple process that people can just use. And the most important part of that process is the first step. Do not call it that word.
I just think that's fantastic and available to all of us as well. That technique is absolutely available to all of us. And that first step that you mentioned, I laughed when you said Peppa Pig, because I was thinking about that word and the feeling. Yeah. And as soon as you said Peppa Pig or something ridiculous, it takes the heaviness away from it. Exactly. Because it's such a contrast to the kind of negativity that we put on that word and that feeling word association, to have something that's so extremely different. I think that could be really, really state changing.
Yeah, that can be useful for a lot of people, because the word itself brings a lot of the associations, and what that brings with it is fear. For most people, it's fear. So people aren't scared of Peppa Pig, or most people aren't, or something silly. So the fear, because you're taking the edge off the fear. Remember, what people are experiencing most of the time in these situations is they're experiencing fear where there is no danger. See, there's no danger, because if there's danger, then you should experience fear. But there's a part of the person that's experiencing fear when there's no danger. It's not necessary. And if they're put in that position, then if they're acknowledging it as that anxiety, they're so used to doing that, and they've conditioned themselves so much. In other words, what they've actually done, to be honest, what most people do is they get really good at self-hypnosis, and they reinforce the negative. So what we need to do is we need to undo that, and then start to reinforce the way they want to feel instead, and make that much more powerful.
This has been a fantastic conversation. I've learned so much from it. And also the aware, I can imagine using that in situations where perhaps I am experiencing what I perceive to be a negative emotion. Thank you so much. Just before we finish, I'd like to ask you if there's anything else you'd like to share on the topic, because you obviously have a huge amount of knowledge and professionalism around this. Is there anything you'd like to say to someone listening to this who is really looking for some answers?
Yeah, I would say that, if people are experiencing certain emotions that they don't want to feel, that it's probably best to seek help somewhere, because often, when we keep trying to solve things ourselves, and if we can't solve it to our satisfaction, or certainly start to move along to some sort of solution, then a lot of people get disillusioned. And then essentially what they do is they then reinforce the problem, and they see the problem as being bigger than them. And one of the key things is that it's the way we know how to solve problems, because we're so logical in our thinking. And obviously the conscious mind interferes, the voice in the head, that's what interferes. And if we can just begin to change the relationship with our thoughts and feelings, it'll make a huge difference. And hypnotherapy it's really powerful to change people's thought patterns. That's why things like a lot of the deep trance phenomena, like time distortion, is really useful, because essentially you can speed up time, slow time down. Hallucinations, really, these are all really great, great situations to use, because it can give people the ability to start to see something for what it is. So it's really, really useful to use a lot of these.
I've loved this conversation. And if you're listening and you're interested in this, then head over to Hypnotherapy Directory to find out more. But I am going to ask you to give us your website and information as well, including your TikTok, because I'm sure people are going to want to hear a lot from you personally on this.
People can find me on Optimind Method, so www.optimindmethod.com. And on TikTok, it's at Optimind Method. And we're on Instagram as well, Optimind Method, and a lot of the other platforms.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I have really, really enjoyed this today.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me on.